Welcome in everyone to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. I am Senpai Zaya. Thank you so much for being here today. So really quick before we do get into the level guide of this build, I just want to know by a show of hands or maybe leaving a like on the video, how many of you out there are like me where when you find a cool new weapon or piece of equipment, you really want to use it, but you might not be able to use it on any of your characters in your current party. So that's where this build comes in. My Bladedancer / combat specialist build is designed to not only output an insane amount of damage, but for those gamers out there that do find a cool new weapon and want to be able to use it no matter what character they're playing. So as long as it's not heavy or two-handed, then you'll be able to dual wield any weapon that you find, which is super cool because there's a ton of really awesome weapons in Baldur's Gate 3. So if that sounds interesting to you, then let's jump right into the level guide. All right, so hopping into character customization, starting out at level 1, for your race, I'm going to go with Githyanki for this build. There's a couple reasons why I'm going with Githyanki. One, because I haven't tried a Githyanki yet, and I really did want to make a build where I could play as a Githyanki. And two, for their ability to get astral knowledge, which allows them to become proficient in like whatever ability score that they want, so whether that be wisdom, charisma, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can get proficiency in all of those ability checks, which is super nice and super useful to have. But on top of that, and the main reason why is because we get access to Longstrider and Misty Step, which is really good because for this build we are not a spellcaster, which means we do not have access to those spells normally. So this is going to allow us to get access to those spells and get into positions in combat that we need to be in. All right, so for your starting class, you are going to start out with Fighter, and the main reason why is because you want to gain access to all of the weapon and armor proficiencies that fighters provide. But on top of that, because we are taking Fighter directly up to 5 and we're not going to want to delay our access to extra attack, it's best to start with Fighter here. However, if you do want to have more skills and proficiencies, then you can start off with Rogue. But personally for me, to be stronger in combat, I'm going to start with Fighter. Now in terms of the fighting style, because this is a dual wield build, naturally you're going to take 2-weapon fighting. And what this is going to allow you to do is that when you make an attack with your offhand weapon, you get to add your ability modifier to the attack of that damage. So basically your main weapon and your offhand weapon are going to do the same amount of damage, assuming you're wielding the two same weapons. So that's really nice and it's absolutely necessary for this build. Now in terms of your starting stats, there is a couple different ways you can go. For me, because I want this to be like a universal build, I'm gonna go like this. So this would be the stat spread that I would go with for this build, so that way we can keep our versatility, and it doesn't matter if we're gonna pick up a strength or dexterity based weapon, we'll be able to do high amounts of damage regardless. Now I will say that if you do want to specialize, or you kind of already have an idea on the type of weapons that you want to dual wield, so for example if you want to dual wield 2 long swords, then you can just focus on strength, or if you want to dual wield like 2 rapiers for example, then you can focus on dexterity. However, with this setup, this allows you to be able to pick up any 2 weapons that you want and use them equally as effectively, which is really the theme of this build, so that's what I'm going to go with here. All right, so moving on to level 2, all this is going to give you is access to Action Surge, and everyone knows how great Action Surge is, so I don't really need to talk about it too much, but if you don't know, it just gives you another action once per short rest, which is huge. And then moving on to level 3, this is where we are going to pick our subclass. That's going to be the Battle Master, and that's super important to this build. The other subclasses aren't really too useful for this build. I will shout out Champion. If you want to go Champion and then you want to go like Half Orc for example, and just focus on like trying to like roll critical strikes, you can do that. But for this build personally, I'm going to go Battle Master because I want the maneuvers. Now in terms of your maneuvers, you have a lot of really good options here. I'm going to tell you the ones that I would personally pick, but do not take that as like the end all be all, because there are a lot of options when it comes to this build, and really a lot of these maneuvers are going to be personal preference. The one I will say that you should absolutely take because it's just super nice to have for this build and for a frontline attacker is Riposte. And what this is going to do is that when an enemy misses an attack on you, then you are automatically going to expend a superiority die and get to attack back with them with your main hand weapon. It's also going to deal an additional 1d8 damage, so it allows for even more damage output. Now you can set this as an ask reaction to see if you want to do it, but most of the time, depending on the enemy or if you're fighting bosses, you're going to want to have this on. So that's the first one I'm going to take. I absolutely highly recommend it. The second one that I am going to take is Disarming Attack. This one's super nice. It has a melee and a ranged variant, but it's a strength save, and if the enemy fails that, then they're going to drop their weapon, which is super huge because if you're going against a boss, then making them drop their weapon is going to give you such a huge advantage in combat. So I absolutely recommend that one as well. And then for your third one, this is where I will say that it's kind of up to you. You have a lot of really good options here. Distracting Strike is really good because it allows you to give advantage to the rest of your party on that target when you do hit them, so that's really nice. So the next one I'm going to shout out is going to be Menacing Attack. And what this does is if you hit an enemy and they fail their wisdom save, then they are going to be frightened for a turn. So that's also really nice because they are going to have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move, which means they can't run away from you, they can't escape. There's not much they can really do, so that's also really nice to have. And then the last one that I'm going to shout out is going to be Trip Attack. This one's also really nice, and it's similar to a couple of the other ones where it's like extra damage and extra CC. So this is going to be a strength save, and you can knock the target prone with this, which is also really good because then you can gain advantage on your attacks on that. So feel free to pick whichever ones that you want. All of them are really good, and it really just depends on the way that you want to play it. And really quick before we do continue on with the video, if you are enjoying this video, then I would just ask you to leave a like on this video, as well as hit the subscribe button if you do want to see more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides. I've been pushing them out literally every week, so make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so that way you don't miss an upload. And on top of that, I actually did start a Patreon, so if you do want to support me and get additional benefits like early access to the videos, as well as a full written guide to us go along with all the builds that I do, then check out the Patreon link down below. Moving on to fighter level 4, we are going to get a feat, and of course we are going to pick the dual wielder feat. Now what this does is it gives you a +1 to your armor class while you're wielding a melee weapon in each hand, which is super nice to have, and it's just going to make it harder to hit us. But more importantly, we get dual wielder, and what this is that this means that you do not have to be wielding weapons that have the light property to dual wield them in both hands. You can wield other things like a longsword, for example, 2 spears if you want. So this really does unlock your ability to just wield whatever 2 weapons that you want. The only thing is you cannot dual wield heavy weapons. But besides that, you get to be able to use whatever cool weapons that you pick up and find. Moving on to level 5, you're going to get extra attack here, and it's a really simple level, but extra attack is huge and we will always take it, and it is very necessary for any melee build. And then if you did go with Githyanki, you're also going to get Misty Step once per long rest, which is again just really nice to have. So starting at level 6, this is when we are going to start multiclassing, and of course it's going to be rogue because we are going to go thief, so that way we can get extra bonus action, which just means basically an extra additional attack on our turns. Now you are going to get some proficiencies and expertise here. You can pick whatever you want. If you do want to be like the rogue in your party and you don't want to have another infiltrator rogue type character in your party, then you can go with like sleight of hand and stealth here, and that's going to help a lot because of course those are the 2 main things that rogue / infiltrator focuses on. However, if you don't want to do that, then you can pick whatever you want. This is going to be really nice because of the fact that we also have astral knowledge, so this allows us to actually be able to pass a lot of skill checks with our character despite not having like a high int wisdom or charisma. So this is really nice. Feel free to mix and match as you see fit and pick the ones that you want to play as. Moving on to level 7, this level is really simple. You are going to get access to Cunning Action Hide, Dash, and Disengage. And I will say that even though this is like small, it's really nice, and a lot of the times I do use Cunning Action Dash to get into the fight if I don't want to use my Long Strider, or if I've already used like Long Strider and Misty Step. Because we have that additional bonus action, then being able to use one of our bonus actions to get into the fight and then still make 3 attacks per turn is really, really nice. Moving on to level 8, this is where we are going to get our Thief subclass, and the most important thing that we're going to get here is of course that additional bonus action, which is super, super amazing, and it's what really just takes this build to the next level. Moving on to level 9, you are going to get a feat, and for this build, this is where you really get to pick what you want to do. Now what you can do is you can either bump your strength up to 18 or you can bump your dexterity up to 18. I'm going to say this is going to be dependent on the weapons that you're currently using, and if you want to go lean more into strength or dexterity, it really just is up to you. I prefer strength because there's more weapons out there that have a higher die roll on strength, so I feel like for the versatility, strength is better. But if you do want to use dexterity, you want to wear like medium armor instead of heavy armor, and you want to be more of like that rogue and not have that disadvantage on your stealth checks, then you can bump your dexterity up as well. For me personally, I'm going to go strength, but again, you can bump your dexterity up to 18 if you want to as well. Now, moving on to level 10, we are actually going to switch back to fighter. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us another feat, which is really nice because you're going to get 2 feats in a row. And this is where I will say that you can either go to your ability score improvement and you can bump up either the strength or dexterity that you put up to 18 up to 20. Or if you want to stay just like universal, then you can, if you had bump strength up to 18, for example, you can bump dexterity up to 18. So that way you can still stay pretty universal. But if you don't want to take an ability score improvement, then the feat that I'm going to recommend, since we already have our dual wielder feat, is Savage Attacker. What this is going to do is when you make a melee attack roll, you can roll your damage twice, and you use the highest result. So that's nice because that's going to allow us to just ink out a little bit more damage. However, I prefer to take the ability score improvement. And for me personally, because I am focusing on strength with this build, I'm going to bump my strength up to 20. But again, remember, it's not absolutely necessary. And there is a couple pieces of equipment that can also bump your strength up or your dexterity. So it's not too huge. Which one you pick, it's really personal preference. Moving on to level 11, we are going to be a fighter level 7, which means we get 2 more maneuvers and we get another superiority dice, which is super nice. So again, you can pick whatever 2 maneuvers you want here. Whichever ones you didn't pick that I mentioned before, you can take those ones if you want. The only one I say probably don't take is going to be Fainting Attack. And even though this does allow you to gain advantage on the attack roll that you're making with this, it uses both your action and your bonus action, and we don't want to use our bonus action and action all in one attack because we want to save our bonus actions for being able to make our offhanded attack. So that's the only one I'm going to shout out that you really shouldn't take, but the other ones that you have available to you, you can take whatever you want and you're going to be able to do just fine with it. Now for the final level, we are going to be a fighter level 8, and what we're going to get here is, of course, another feat. So this is where, if you haven't already, you can take the Savage Attacker now. But if you don't want to do that and you want to take another ability score improvement, then you can bump like your dexterity or strength, whichever one you didn't, up to the next level if you want. And that's going to be really good too. However, there are like the gloves of dexterity that already give your dexterity up to 18, so it's like you can wear those instead. But there's also equipment that gives you like on hit damage, and that's what I prefer to wear in my gloves section. So here, because I know I'm going to mainly be using strength weapons, I'm actually going to take Savage Attacker. But again, if you want to stick with the theme of being able to pick up whatever and use whatever, then you can take your dexterity up to 18 or strength up to 18 as well, and that will work just fine for you. All right, so moving on to the equipment section. This section is going to be relatively small. There is a couple different good equipment that I'm going to put up on the screen. I'm not going to put any weapons up on the screen because, again, the point of this build is to be pretty universal and just pick up and use whatever you want. But what I am going to shout out for equipment for this build is look for any equipment or weapons that do give you like additional damage on hit. So whether it be like your melee attack still an additional 2 acid damage, or you find like a longsword that has like 1d4 psychic damage on it or something, those weapons are going to be the best for this build because you are making multiple attacks. So that's going to just add to the total amount of damage that you are going to output. So that's the main thing that I would look out for. Other than that, it really is a pretty universal build, so feel free to just pick up and use whatever you want. All right, so moving on to the build recap. I love this build, and the main reason why I love this build is as a gamer, and especially as an RPG gamer, one of the things that I love about RPG games is like finding new loot, finding new equipment, finding awesome new weapons, and being able to use them. And this build allows you to do that. You don't have to use like specific weapons. You're not shoehorned into using just great swords or whatever. You can use almost anything that you want, which makes the build super universal, but also super fun to play, because whenever you do find a cool new weapon, chances are you can probably just make it work, and it might just even be better than one of the 2 weapons you're building anyway. But on top of that, with this build, you also get to dual wield 2 hand crossbows. So even if you can't get into melee combat, you can still dish out an insane amount of damage thanks to dual wielding those 2 hand crossbows, and having a lot of your maneuvers also have a range variant as well. Now, one of the things that I also like about this build is the amount of damage output that we get to do. A lot of people will shout out that like dual wielding and just going is not as good as like great weapon fighting, for example, and having like a great sword. But with this build and with everything that we have stacked, in most cases you can output just as much, if not more damage than some of those like two-handed weapon builds can do. So you'll be able to output an insane amount of damage. You'll be super versatile. You have a lot of options. You even have some like CC and utility options thanks to your maneuvers. You can be the party's rogue if you need it to be. Like, this build really has so much going for it, and it's really nice because it is such a universal build for not even being like a spellcasting build at all. So I really like this build. I really do hope you enjoyed this build video. If you did, then once again, make sure just to leave a like on the video and hit the subscribe button, and make sure to turn on the bell so that way you don't miss my Baldur's 3 build guide videos. I am literally uploading them every week, so make sure to come back next Friday for another build. There will be a link to a poll down below where you can vote on the next build, so make sure to go check that out. And that is all for me today, so I will see you in the next one.